Welcome, I'm Darren, and I'll be your guide today as I look at the 1998 Fleer Ultra baseball set. So, in 1997, Fleer reinvented its entire brand. Fleer turned into Fleer Tradition that they were able to use for about 3 years. Flair also developed a pattern that was used for about 3 years. But in both of those cases, as you got into the new millennium, they had to kind of reinvent them, in the case of Flair, quite literally. But with Fleer Ultra, what they developed in 1997 was a design that could work for the full rest of the decade of the existence of the company. They would just make minor tweaks year by year, and so Fleer Ultra just always looked like Fleer Ultra, and it always acted like Fleer Ultra. 1998 was the first year that they started to work with this and evolve it year on year. And so the design for 1998 is very similar to 1997, where it's a full bleed image with kind of like a, not quite a signature, but written text is what it looks like for the player name. In 1997, they had used what looked like it was inspired by a signature. In 98, it's just really fancy cursive, but it's also embossed, lightly embossed, so it's really more in relief, but it also has foil on it, and that gives a really great quality to where these cards look exquisite. Over in football, it was the perfect timing for the Peyton Manning rookie card. In baseball, it wasn't really significant for anything, but it just has a very unique look to it that does look really good. And then over on the card back, they redesigned the card back to be a lot more straightforward, where they have a completely unadorned image up above at the top, and then the whole bottom, almost a perfect box, is clearly separated away for all the stats, all the information about the player. So they were building it in a more structured way as opposed to 1997, which was more stylish and difficult to read. But the big thing about Ultra at this point was they now had their two parallels. And in 1998, they continued them on, where the main parallel is their gold medallion cards, where on the back they have a G next to the number, but on the front, this, instead of just changing the foil color to a gold holofoil, here the whole background it's changed over to a metallic gold foil effect, which has not quite a sparkly quality to it, but it almost has the appearance of a grit to it, which is just an amazing look to these cards. There's a really rich vibrance to it. And then the foil on the text is kind of a champagne hollow foil kind of color, it's very distinct, and it makes it very clear from the main cards in the set, so it's a lot easier to tell these cards. But the big story is the platinum cards. Because the platinum medallion cards, they did the same thing, except, well, actually they didn't, because while the gold medallion cards have a full color image of the player, here everything is black and white. And even the color has been taken away from the foil in the text, but it's replaced by a patterned prismatic holofoil. So these cards are very distinct. On the back, obviously, they have the P next to the number, but the big thing here is they're all serial numbered out of 100. In 1997, they just told everybody there are 200 copies of each. But in 1998, they actually delineated the numbering so that you could see that they were all numbered out of 100, and it gave the cool quality of having the serial number. Only that's not entirely the case, because this is Series 1. In Series 2, they shifted over to being numbered out of 98, which is what we would see in football shortly thereafter. So even while they're releasing their baseball cards, they're kind of rethinking the model. So Series 1, there are 100 copies of each of the platinum cards. In Series 2, there are only 98. And I do need to distinguish that that's across the entire set of both Series 1 and Series 2, because the sets are not designed in a very straightforward manner, because they actually have SP cards that bring both of those series to a close. In Series 1, the SP cards for the first of the two SP cards are their prospect cards, which are basically like rookies. These cards are merely SPs in terms of they're less common than the regular set. So the main set prior to this, which is veteran cards, that is the core set, and then this is an addition, kind of like an add-on to the set. These cards are done the same way, they just have the prospect logo on it. They're not serial numbered, there's nothing to distinguish their rarity. They're just a lot more uncommon than the main cards in the set. But they also had their season crowns. And these cards this is just a small number of cards that came right at the end of Series 1. Obviously a big baseball logo or a baseball theme for the background behind the player. These cards, both of these subsets, the parallels are exactly the same rate as the regular cards. So the parallels are all the same number or the same quantity. It's just that the base level of the cards is an SP for these two sets. But then over in Series 2, they closed out their set with a subset called Pizzazz. Now here we have a great team color for the design, the pattern behind the player, and the text. I love the way that the color comes through on the text on these cards. Again, like with Series 1, these are at the base level, more hard to get, more difficult to put together than the core of the set. And then with the parallels, they are the same rate, so it's actually easier to collect the parallel set in a way than it is to collect the main set for the set, but the set is considered complete without these SP cards. Now, unlike in previous years, they brought the checklist cards back into the set. And do understand these are basic level cards, so they're actually brought into the set before the SP cards, so they're not at the actual end of the set. But it is kind of nice that the checklist cards are now a part of the set again, because it'd been a little while since they'd been kind of banished to the insert range. But before I move on to the inserts, there is one other card that's a standalone SP card that's really pretty unusual. So the story comes down to this: when they were making their 1998 Fleer set, the Fleer Tradition set, they did a promo card, or a prototype card, which was a card of Alex Rodriguez. And the Alex Rodriguez card was, they distributed it out. Well, they took 750 of those cards and set them aside, and Alex Rodriguez signed them all. They're all individually hand numbered to 750, and then those were inserted into packs of Ultra. So you could open a pack of Ultra and get a Fleer Tradition promo card autographed by Alex Rodriguez. Really weird. But that is an SP card, essentially a standalone SP card that came along with Fleer Ultra. Very interesting component to this whole story. But then we get to move on to the inserts. Now the first insert is called Artistic Talent, and this is a card that has a canvas surface on the front, or the front is done up to be like canvas. Now, in order to really sell the whole theme, they lightened the image of the players to make it look almost like it's a watercolor, have that kind of a feel to it. And it's really effective, but then they have the gold holofoil up at the top for the text, which is a wonderful counterpoint, which makes this card really quite interesting to experience. Then they have a set called Back to the Future. This is a horizontal card, and it has a light relief to it. I'm not going to say embossed, but it has a slight relief to it. For the holofoil text, it has the relief, but also for the player himself, right in the middle of the card, there's relief to that as well, which adds a bit of an interest to this card, which makes it kind of interesting, kind of cool. Now, for big shots, this is a card where obviously it's a bunch of long ball hitters. It is a picture that is pasted onto an artistic drawing of a ball being hit out of a stadium. Pretty straightforward. This card is not embossed. It has no relief, and I need to distinguish that because the big shots text on the side with the holofoil looks like it should be in 3D because they drew in the 3D-esque quality to the text on it, but that's not the way that it comes. It is actually flat. Then they have Diamond Immortals, and Diamond Immortals is easily the showiest card in the set. First off, it is heavily die cut. I mean, this only has like 70% of the original card still on it. So much of it has been lost to the die cutting, but that makes it very difficult to work with because there's very little to hang on to. So if you pick up some cards, this one has a tendency to slide out. One you got to be more careful with. And the prismatic holofoil on the card also brings out a great richness to it. But this card is very rare, And because of its uniqueness, this is a card that a lot of people like to pursue, so it tends to be a lot more expensive than any of the other cards in the release. So it is tough to track them down, but that actually leads me to the other Diamond set, which is Diamond Producers, which is a thick card. Now, Diamond Producers, the reason that it's a thick card is because it's actually a composite card. So the holofoil and the picture of the player on the front are basically pasted onto the rest of the card, which is the kind of thing that I know that a lot of people nowadays are taking old cards and they're cutting them up and putting like jerseys and stuff in it. Personally, I'm not a fan of that, but this is an actual composite card from 1998. And so it has that on it, and then right around, just behind it, you have the black border, which is a leather border or a leather-esque border. And then inside is a piece of wood that's behind the entire card. And that's the reason it's so thick, is because it's got so much going on. But this is the other card that's really difficult to come by, and also that's very unique, and so people have a strong tendency to want to try to track these down and collect them. They go for quite a bit. Then we have Double Trouble, and this is two teammates. And this is a card concept I'm surprised isn't done more often, because the idea of having like a starter and a reliever, or having two really good hitters that are lined up next to each other in the batting order, that kind of thing, I'm surprised that's not done more often. So here they've done it, and then they did it in 1997 as well. But you would think that they would spend more time putting cards of 2 or 3 teammates in insert sets and subsets, but it was more common. I don't know if it was same team or multiple teams in the 1980s. In the 90s it was pretty uncommon, and so this is one of the rare exceptions. Then we got Fall Classics, and this is a card that normally, because of all the holofoil, I would say is boring, except for this card, it has like a glow to it that I think is really cool. I don't know why it just seems to glow so well and why it reads so well for me, but this is a card that, while is not an interesting card, it has a cool quality that can maintain my gaze, and it actually lives up to whatever potential it might have had. Interesting how well this comes through. And then we've got Kid Gloves. Now, Kid Gloves, I'm not even going to say that this is relief. This is embossed. It's lightly embossed, but this one really does come through as embossed. But I gotta say, I'm really, really, really surprised that they didn't die cut this card. I don't know why. It looks like it should be die cut. It's screaming to be die cut, but they didn't. They left it with that white area up the top for what it's worth. But still, with the level of relief from the embossing, it works really well. So this is a good card. Then we've got Millennium Men, and now we're getting into a really interesting card, because when you look at the card, it looks like a team color picture of a player with a pewter plaque in the middle of the card, which is all valid. But just below that plaque is actually an edge, because this is a bifold card. It's 3 parts, and so the card has 2 pieces that come open like a hinge, and inside you have an extra tall card, which in this case has another portrait of the player. It has the team logo, and it has his bio information, which would normally go on the card back. In this case, they put it all inside of this card. And the card is not really intended to be opened very much. They actually have a little bit of rubber cement that holds it together, so it's easy to pull apart, but it's not a card that's intended to be open all the time. Still, pretty interesting. Then they have Notables, and Notables is another case where this is a card normally I'd be pretty disappointed with, because it's got all the holofoil on it, except the way that the league logo and the way that they designed everything in the background, the way that works, the card has not a liveliness and a richness to it, but it has a cool effect that still works pretty well. It's not the most exciting card, but it does work effectively enough at what it's supposed to do, which is a thing to note, because then I move on to Power Plus, which is technically better than the 97 version, but still, it's reliant too much on the holofoil, and this has relief, and that's what makes it better than the previous year. But still, this has less of an adorned quality than the Notables, and so in this case, this is a card where I look at and I see the potential that isn't realized, whereas with Notables, I see it more in an optimistic light. In either case, they're not they're not the most rich cards, but they're good enough. But then Prime Leather is a card that actually does succeed at capitalizing on all of its potential. Now, like in previous years, this is probably not a leather surface. It's probably done up to feel like leather, but it's very effective at that by having all the ridges and a matte feel that does feel pretty much like leather. But here, unlike in previous years, they did a good job with actual design work, which makes the card interesting. Not the most interesting thing, but at least it does have a good amount of interest, so that is an excellent quality about Prime Leather. But if you really want to see some interest, you move on to Rocket to Stardom, which is a card that is, well, right from the outset, it's die cut, but it reminds me of the decal cards that Topps did in, I believe it was the early 70s. The pattern around the outside is very similar. It is a little bit more narrow than other cards. It's a little bit better to work with than the Diamond Immortals, but still the pattern does make it pretty tough overall. But this card is really notable because of the embossing that it has. Again, it's more about relief than embossing, but embossing fits because of how much they have with this card. Almost every part of this card has relief on it. And the player can almost not even be seen in the card because of all that stuff that's going on. They were having a really fun time creating this card. And it's not, again, not the most exciting card, but at least this one does have a lot of intrigue and very, very distinct. But getting back to the Millennium Men concept, we have Ticket Studs. And Ticket Studs is a card that is not a bifold, it is a single fold, but it is a card to open up. Now, the width is more narrow than a normal card, the height is the same height, but the whole point of this is it's supposed to be opened up. I mean, it doesn't even have, I don't think any of these had the rubber cement. I know the ones that I have, I never had rubber cement on them. But you open it up, and the front of it is a portrait of the player, and on the back of it you have all of the card back type information, including the number buried inside the card, which means this is a card that really is supposed to be seen more open than closed. And then we have Top 30. Now Top 30 is a little bit misleading because when I look at this card, all I can think is that is a parallel. It's not. Now part of the reason I think it's a parallel is because in 1997 when they did this set, well, the set did have a parallel, but the big thing is it's the particular color that they use for the background behind the player, which just screams out that this needs to be a parallel. This is a card that wants to have color on it, and the only color it has is the player's jersey, which is very unusual, but I need to really hammer home, this is not a parallel. This is the way the whole set is. And then one last card remains, and that is Win Now. This is an acetate card. Although it's a little tough to tell most of the time that it's acetate. You got the black band down the middle with the player name, and then on one side you have the full action shot of the player. On the other side you have a very, very subdued acetate window. And the acetate window, when you get the light in it, you'll see that you have half of the portrait of the face of the player. Not the most impressive use of acetate, but it has an interesting quality within the world of acetate cards, so that's definitely a plus. But as you can see, because they had two series, they had a lot of inserts. And thankfully, we've gone through all of them. So, that is what they did for 1998 Ultra. That's a lot. 1999 is not as bad, so when I get around to doing that video, it won't go for as long, there won't be as much to talk about. But the set will start to get a little bit more rich in that aspect. 1998, they hadn't quite gotten there with the set, but they were getting there. They were starting down that road. So, definitely look out for that video when it comes out. I've already done everything from 1991 through 1997, so if you haven't seen those, definitely check this out. Also, if you haven't subscribed to my channel, please do so, and thank you very much for watching.